Welcome to our new episode of Unresolved, the Diddy Cases. I'm Kelly Hyman, your host. Julia Jenae is a Court TV legal correspondent and experienced attorney. She's also an Emmy Award-winning investigative journalist. Several of her reports have promoted state investigation, policy changes, and reimbursement of taxpayer money. Julia has also handled hundreds of civil cases, wrongful death, and personal injury cases. Julia is a member of the Florida Bar and Georgia Bar. Let's welcome Julia Jenae. Julia, it's so great to see you. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Kelly, it is great to be with you. Thanks so much for having me.
In regards to the opening statement, who do you think did a better job, the prosecution or the defense, and why?
So, opening statements is so important in helping a jury that some may know something about Sean Diddy Combs and his case, but many said that they did not read into it a lot, that they did not research it, maybe heard a headline here and there. So, opening statements is their chance to hear both sides on what we hope in the legal system is this even playing field. You had Emily Johnson on the prosecution side giving an opening statement for the prosecution. Of course, they go first. And then you have Teddy Garagos for the defense giving her defense opening for this jury. They didn't choose to wait until the defense case. They went ahead right in the beginning to share those opening statements. And I think Emily Johnson really laid it out for these jurors in a way that they could digest what the issues were. She, first of all, made sure they knew who he was, that he is this recognizable figure, someone who had this fame, who had this wealth. But then she let them know that what you don't see is a very dark side of Sean Diddy Combs. And the way that she ended it, after she detailed what they would be hearing from alleged victims, what they would be hearing from the witnesses who come in to talk about what his business, what his criminal enterprise, alleged criminal enterprise was like, she then ended her opening statement in a way that I thought was important. She said, first, this is something that we are going to show you in terms of sex trafficking. We are then going to show you that there were commercial sex acts. We are then going to show you that he did transport people across state lines in order for there to be prostitution. And all of that equals these charges that we have laid out for you. So I think that's going to be important throughout this case for the prosecution to make sure the jury understands how these elements attach to the facts that they are delivering in this case. But I know you wanted to ask me about not just those opening statements. You want to hear about the defense as well?
Yes, let's talk about the defense opening statements. What did you think?
I thought that they did the best that they could with the evidence in front of them. They had to own a lot in this case. They had to own the fact that he was someone who committed domestic violence. You don't usually hear that in an opening statement. Danny Garrigo said, yes, you may not like this guy at the end of the day. We acknowledge he's a jerk. People called him a jerk many times, that he was controlling perhaps in some of his behavior, that he abused women. I mean, when do you hear an opening statement where the attorney acknowledges that there was something as heinous as abuse in this relationship? But they urged this jury to look at the facts and the charges and to recognize that this is not sex trafficking, that it is not someone who is coercing someone to engage in these sex acts, that rather this was a type of lifestyle. This is what they were putting out to the jury, a lifestyle that may be uncommon for these jurors, may be uncommon for people watching this trial, but that for those in Sean Diddy Combs' circle, that it was consensual, that this was a complicated relationship. So the emphasis was on this is complicated. Even if you don't understand it, just know that it was not criminal based on the actual statute for these RICO charges.
So let's talk about what exactly he's been charged with. As you pointed out, the defense came out up front and said that he committed domestic violence, but in fact that he's not charged with it. So let's talk about what exactly he's charged with and what does a prosecution have to do to prove their case?
Sure. So racketeering is this overarching charge that he is facing in federal court. And I do want to talk about racketeering for a moment because originally, when this law came about and when it was being used by federal prosecutors decades ago, this was used to attack and be able to round up mobsters. I mean, that's what it was traditionally known as, this type of law that could help go after people who had really insulated themselves from any culpability. They weren't able to be brought in for this robbery. They weren't able to be brought in for this shakedown. But because they had all of their business surrounding these bad acts, the prosecution was able to link everything together into a case that would actually bring down someone who was pretty powerful, who had a lot of money. And so we're seeing that here, but you've got to have counts underneath. You have to have overt acts. You have to have actual crimes that are being promoted by this criminal enterprise. And here, Sean Diddy Combs is being charged with using his billion-dollar company in order to carry out sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, the transportation of victims or individuals. Doesn't have to be someone who was necessarily coerced in terms of everyone involved, but that they were being transported for the purpose of prostitution, and that he was using his power in order to bring that about. So, in answer to your question about what do prosecutors have to prove, they have to prove, and specifically under the Sex Trafficking Act, that he enticed uh, the people involved into having this commercial sex, and that he did that enticement and forced them to do it essentially by force, fraud, or coercion. And they also have to prove that he was transporting people over state lines in order to carry out these commercial sex acts. So I think the prosecution has their work cut out for them in this case, because it's not as cut and dry as what I think the average juror, average person would think about when they think about sex trafficking, because we're talking about escorts that are flying first class over state lines to different places. And seemingly there are text messages from Cassie Ventura being a part of it. So, really, what they have to prove is that force, fraud, or coercion.
In regards to the opening statement, who do you think did a better job, the prosecution or the defense, and why?
That is a really good question. I don't know that I can say either one did better or worse. I think the prosecution had a very strong layout of their openings, and I think that's key. You've got to make this simple for jurors and show them that this is not a complicated case. But the defense had a really bad set of facts. I mean, they have really the worst set of facts when it comes to a case like this. So to be able to take ownership of things, I think is a powerful move. I think many defense attorneys miss that when it comes to how they present a case. They want to say that everything is wrong, that nothing is as you see it. Some may even argue, or may have, if they didn't have the strategy that this team has, may have tried to argue away that video. We even heard Diddy himself argue away that video in his apology, where he came out publicly and said, I was in a very dark place in my life. Could have argued that, oh, he was under the influence of drugs. That is coming out in the cross examination of some of these witnesses. But I think that ownership stance was a very powerful one to make in light of just how bad this case is against Diddy.
But can he use that as his defense, saying that he was using drugs? And so does that make it okay for the allegations that he's charged with?
I definitely don't think it's a justification for what happened. But what the defense is trying to do is to say that his drug use and him being under the influence of drugs may explain why he continued to do this, and that it may lessen his intentionality. So if he's someone who's on a bender, doesn't know what he's doing, is kind of out of his mind or blacking out when he is allegedly forcing Cassie to continue in these acts, then that may be something that they present to the jury when we have closing arguments, to say both of these individuals were under the influence of drugs. This is the lifestyle in this case, and it doesn't show that he's this head honcho who is calling all the shots and making things happen, despite the fact that he has so much money, so much power, and so much fame.
You said that this case is not cut and dry. Why do you think that?
Because it's outside the bounds of traditionally how we view some of these terms. When we see the idea of, or we think about the idea of human trafficking, sex trafficking, I don't think for many people it looks like what we're hearing about in court. In people's minds, and as an investigative reporter, I used to cover cases where we would go behind the scenes with investigators who were looking for trafficked people. You think about these seedy hotels, you think about people who are under the radar, who are keeping people captive, who are either missing or people are no longer looking for them. They're in the system or out of the system. So the idea that this looks different, I think makes this a more difficult case for the prosecution. I actually, Kelly, don't believe that this was a situation where the feds suspected sex trafficking and then started their investigation. I think they saw Cassie's lawsuit and were so horrified by all the things that she said back in September of 2023 about Sean Diddy Combs, her relationship, the abuse. They wanted to get this guy and they wanted to go in, raid his homes, look at what he had, what he was doing, get those communications, start talking to witnesses, and see what kind of case they could build against him. We've seen a lot of different kind of RICO cases, high profile ones in the last couple of years. The most recent one that ended was against a rapper, Young Thug, where he was charged with RICO for using his music label to actually carry out a criminal enterprise. And in that situation, some of the overt acts were robbery or attempted murder or intimidating witnesses. And he was eventually, he pleaded out on that mid-trial, the longest trial. But that was a difficult case because Young Thug himself had not committed, or they didn't have strong evidence that he'd committed any of these individual ones, but that he had sent people to his bidding. You also had the president, the current president, facing a RICO case in Georgia over election fraud and what they said accused him of, which he's not facing any longer. But using these different incidents to get a RICO case. Um, so that's why I think it's not cut and dry, because I don't think RICO is cut and dry when it comes to the average person who is sitting on a jury or even watching along in this trial.
Let's talk about the witnesses. Cassie Ventura is the star witness, so why not have her be the first witness in this case to start off with the star witness?
I actually, in reading back the notes of that part of the trial, Kelly, they had to call those out of order because of scheduling issues. And we see that happen sometimes, that the prosecution can't ensure that these witnesses are going to be there on a certain date. So they call them when they can. Maybe they had travel, maybe they have surgery. We never know. But they called them in the beginning before Cassie for that reason. And it almost caused some problems, right? She is 8.5 months pregnant. She was on the stand for the second, third, fourth, and not the fifth, but those days of trial. And she wasn't there for the first day. And the defense argued that they wanted to cross examine her longer, but they couldn't because the judge had said she needs to be wrapped up by the end of the week. We know that she could go into labor at any time. And the defense accused the prosecution of not calling her first. Why didn't you put her at the top of your list? You chose to go with these other people. We could have had the entire week instead of 4 days to go over it. But it all worked out. They were able to wrap up that cross-examination in time for her to be done that first week of trial.
So, from the prosecution standpoint, how did she do as a witness?
Incredibly strong, incredibly strong. I don't think there were any problems with Cassie Ventura's testimony overall. I mean, even in the way that she handled cross-examination, sure, there was a lot about her seeming willingness to be involved in some of these quote freak-offs in terms of getting that in front of the jury. But what she was able to establish in her direct is something that's got to be sticking with these jurors. I mean, for her to talk about the abuse, the beatings, being scared of being outside of him, walking these jurors through her age at the time, that she was young, that he was one of her first boyfriends, that he introduced her to things that she hadn't done before sexually, and that he was the one to start saying, I want these freak offs, do this for me. And she was able to point out that he was controlling her career. I mean, I think a lot of us were surprised that she had recorded hundreds of songs that never saw the light of day. And we wonder, what happened to Cassie? What happened to her music career? It was very telling, and she was a very powerful witness.
She was powerful to discuss what she went through, but was she powerful to help prove the sex trafficking, the RICO, and in the transportation to engage in prostitution charges?
That's a really good question, right? Um, I think she proves a certain part of the case. So for the sex trafficking, she identified that Sean Diddy Combs was the one who started to ask her about the freak off, that he set the first one up, that he told her, here's a binder of people that you need to look through and pick. So that goes to the part of the statute that says enticement or recruiting for the Commercial Sex Act. Then you had not only her, but you have these escorts who have taken the stand to confirm that there was commercial sex that was happening. And Cassie also testified that the freak offs, I hate calling them that, right? Because this is what they called them, but the prosecution is saying they were criminal. But the freak offs were happening in different locations across the country, internationally. So you've got the transportation part. What Cassie has to establish, and what we're now seeing witnesses corroborate, is the force, fraud, or coercion. Did she feel forced to do this? It's a tough one because the defense is able to show that there's times where she knows that if she proposes a freak off, then things will go well with their relationship. If she sets it up, then XYZ may happen that will benefit her. But seeing that video, seeing her being beaten by Diddy, I think this prosecution is able to show she had a fear of him, or she had a reason to fear him, and that could go to this force, fraud, or coercion. But it's an uphill battle.
How did the defense do in their cross examination of her?
They did really well. I think they brought up the points that they wanted to. I don't think that undermined the victim status of Cassie on the stand, the empathy, no doubt, that these jurors felt when they heard her describe what it was like while she was in the midst of these freak offs, the just humiliating things that happened to her while she was in the midst of these freak offs. We've seen the headlines. This was some pretty raunchy, to say the least, stuff, Kelly. And they, though, on cross examination, were just able to bring out what we sadly often see when it's a domestic violence victim. They'll bring out that, well, you went back to them, you stayed with them, you did not go to the police, you did not file a report, you didn't tell everyone. So they brought up, unfortunately, the classic things that we see the defense bring up, and we'll see how this jury responds to the way that they handled that witness.
How do you think the other witnesses did after her, and what was the purpose of having the other witnesses that testified after Miss Ventura?
The witnesses that testified after Cassie, they've been powerful as well because they are corroborating everything that she has said. These jurors will know that all these witnesses are sequestered. They can't hear each other's testimony. So if you hear testimony that mirrors and sounds very similar, for a juror, that can help them believe this is credible. They weren't allowed to talk about this as the trial was going on. They went through all of this questioning by both the prosecution and defense. So if it lines up, that can add to how the jurors feel about credibility. I thought Carrie Morgan, the longtime best friend, was very helpful to the prosecution's case, especially since she's not a best friend anymore. She's someone who fell out with Cassie back in 2018 because of abuse that she saw. I mean, it doesn't get more clear to a jury than that. She not only witnessed the beatings of Cassie, but she herself testified about being assaulted by Combs with a wooden hanger, and that she received a $30,000 payout to keep quiet about it. So that was helpful to corroborating what Cassie said on the stand, shows that She did, in a way, tell her friends about it, if that makes sense. She didn't outcry to police, but this was a friend who was here witnessing it and saying, you need to go to police, you need to get out. And if you're not going to get out, I'm going to remove myself.
What about one of the male escorts that testified on cross examination that it appeared to allude to the fact that Miss Ventura was consenting to this, that she enjoyed doing these freak offs and being involved in all this? Doesn't that hit at the heart of the sex trafficking? Was it in fact consent by her part, or was it force, fraud, or coercion?
I actually found them to be more illuminating for the case than I expected. I knew they would be able to talk about whether or not this was commercial sex, but Daniel Phillips was one of the first witnesses. He actually came before Cassie, and he set the stage for just his heartbreaking for this young woman. Even though he's there to perform the sex act, he's getting paid, he's recognizing who she is over time, and he said he felt a bond with her. But he's able to say that he heard abuse happening behind closed doors. He recognized that it was Diddy. And there's one point where he said he couldn't even, quote, perform while this was happening because of some of the actions of Sean Diddy Combs. So that helps the prosecution, no doubt. But yes, the defense was able to use some of what these escorts said to try and show consent. And that's what it comes down to, Kelly. I think it comes down to fame or force. Was Cassie doing this because she wanted to ingratiate herself with Sean Diddy Combs? Or was she feeling force? Was it psychological force or actual force where she felt she had to do a good job, had to act like she was enjoying this? And it's not that she could never have enjoyed it. I mean, it's almost like we see with domestic violence cases. There are honeymoon phases in even an abusive relationship. There are times when things are going to be good. You can give consent and then withdraw consent. So even if there were times where she was on a binger with Diddy, they were having a good time, I don't think that negates that there may have been force. But what's the defense going to do with that? They're going to say, how can we know whether or not she consented to it if her actions are varied like this?
Yeah, some would say actions speak louder than words, but it's important to remember about the burden, right? There could be one person on the jury that says that the prosecution haven't proved their case beyond a reasonable doubt. So, do you think right now that the case is more a prosecution case, or is it more a defense case?
Right now, it's more a prosecution case. Of course, because they are the ones who are controlling what's happening inside of the courtroom. It's their case in chief. So they are bringing in the witnesses that are the most helpful to them. So right now, where we stand on, what is it, day 8, going on day 9, I think the prosecution is certainly ahead in front of this jury.
Do you think there's anything else the viewers should know or you'd like to share in regards to the criminal case?
Well, we talked a lot about how we're seeing high profile cases like this. The R. Kelly trial is one that I was inside of the courtroom for, similar charges, RICO, sex trafficking. There were underage women that were alleged as victims, and he was convicted of that. So that's what may vary it from the Diddy trial. But the arguments about fame, power, drawing in these women and then using them for their own sexual gain, it reads like the exact same story, but just 4 years later. So I think it's important that at least when we are covering these, we don't necessarily want to change the definition of certain things just because of the high profile nature. But there's got to be people who are watching this who are seeing similarities. I guess I say that for that reason, that if there's any kind of a pattern, you want there to be change. You want there to be actual change. You don't just want there to be RICO charges and one person goes away. If there were many people who were complicit, many people who may be victims and finding themselves in the same situation, not knowing that they can reach out, that the government, the prosecution, investigators will listen. I think that's really important. So I keep pushing 1-800-799-SAFE for anyone who's in that same situation, who's hearing these stories and thinking, this is what I've dealt with. I didn't know if it was something that investigators would take seriously because I sent them an I love you text, or maybe there was a second time or a third time. I think it's just important for awareness and domestic violence awareness, if anything good can come out of what all we are hearing out of that courtroom.
Thanks for sharing that. As you said, we're in the prosecution's case. So, from the defense standpoint, will Diddy testify?
You have the great questions, Kelly. Our roles are reversed right now, you know? Usually it's me asking you the questions as a legal analyst on Court TV. But I don't think so. I don't think so. He has got such incredible lawyers. He's got an incredible team, diverse team. I mean, and these are some of the best attorneys that he could find. So I think they are going to protect him. They're not going to have him take the stand. We don't typically see someone in his position taking the stand because your attorneys are going to be able to say it better than you can. And he opens himself up. Like, it's one thing for your attorneys to say, yes, we know he's a terrible guy, but he's going to have to really sell it if he gets up there and admits, yes, I was an abuser. Yes, I controlled. Yes, I lit Kid Cudi's car on fire. Like, all of these things that he has to admit to will be there all day. And what is he going to say that's going to help himself? I didn't coerce. I don't see any value to him taking the stand if I'm the defense.
So, if he doesn't take the stand, who is going to be the star witness for the defense? Who is he going to call, and what are they going to prove in regards to their testimony?
I wonder if he has a girlfriend, a former whatever, um, that can take the stand and say that she was in the same kind of relationship with him that Cassie was, and that she didn't feel forced or coerced at all, that this was an understanding of when you were with him, that these are the things that he liked, and that she probably, if she can show this, did the similar things, did the same things that Cassie did. I don't know. I think that in a way could help because it seems like most of the women in his life are coming forward to say the opposite. So that may be a strong witness for him.
Talking about the civil case, and you've tried civil cases, how would you approach representing the plaintiffs, the alleged victims that are suing Diddy in those civil cases?
Yeah, a lot of cases, and we're not hearing about all of them so far inside of this courtroom. The opening statements showed us that there are 2 to 3 alleged victims who are going to be testifying, but that doesn't compare, right, to all of the headlines that we saw when Diddy was first being investigated and then ultimately charged. We were seeing dozens upon dozens of people coming forward. But I think if you are a plaintiff's attorney and you're representing someone, you're watching this trial. You're watching this trial to take notes and make sure that if there's any evidence that's relevant to your client, you are then putting that away, filing it if you need to in whatever you need to as far as evidence or discovery um, in the court and with Diddy's team. He's got a separate civil team, of course. But this trial is huge for those civil cases because the outcome really could impact what the outcome will be in civil court. And you don't have as high a burden of proof, as you know, in civil court, Kelly.
Why do you think this verdict will have an effect on the civil cases?
It's just a matter of fact that if he is found guilty in criminal court, it's going to be that much easier for his civil team to show, hey, he has a pattern of this force, fraud, or coercion. He's been convicted of it in this court, and no doubt it's going to be a quicker settle if he's found guilty. If he's found not guilty, it doesn't mean those civil cases go away, because as I mentioned, the burden of proof is lower. You only have to prove it's more likely than not that he committed the things that are alleged in those civil suits, whereas it's beyond a reasonable doubt in criminal court. But the value of your case goes down, if he is found not guilty, and if your civil suit mirrors much of what the prosecution put forth in the actual federal case.
Thank you so much, Julia, for your insight. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with our viewers?
I am happy to answer any questions. I'm always open in my DMs to answering questions that people have. You can find me at Julia Court TV, and you can watch Court TV. Some people don't know that, but we stream for free online and on air. Just go to courttv.com. I'm on air from 12 to 3 every day, and I have great guests like you, Kelly, who come on all the time and break all of this down.
Thank you so much, Julia Jenae, for your insight. We all look forward to watching you on Court TV. Dave Aronberg is a politician and attorney who served as state attorney of Palm Beach County, Florida from 2013 to 2025. He is a Democrat who served the Florida Senate from 2002 through 2010. Let's welcome Dave Aronberg. Dave, welcome. It's nice to have you on the show.
Great to be with you, Kelly, and I'm a recovering politician. I'm in private practice now, and those political days are behind me, at least for now.
Let's talk about the Diddy trial. How do you think the opening statements went overall?
The opening statements went well for both sides. I think this case is being really well lawyered. There's great lawyers on both sides. I do think that overall the prosecution is ahead, and I think they set the tone in the opening statement because this case really does stem around a lack of consent. And that's what they've been showing over and over again. And it'll be the defense's job when they get to introduce evidence to show that these individuals did consent, or at least it was so hazy and murky that there's reasonable doubt.
What do you think are the themes for the prosecution, and how did they present that in the opening statement?
Well, what they said they would do, and they're doing it, is to show that Diddy is at the top of this criminal enterprise that serves to feed his sexual desires, and he has a whole team around him, and they've used force, fraud, and coercion, and the one who connects all the dots is Cassie, the key witness. So I think that they are accomplishing their goal, although it has not been without some hiccups. The defense has scored some points, but overall, I think the prosecution is ahead.
Why do you think the prosecution is ahead overall?
I think of the power of Cassie, the key witness. Cassie Ventura took the stand, and not only was she credible with her words, her demeanor, but also she's 8 months pregnant. I mean, that is so powerful in front of a jury that the defense lawyers did not want the jurors to see Cassie 8 months pregnant. So they asked the judge to keep her in the witness box while the jury walked in the room. And the judge said, no. They're going to be able to see Cassie in all her glory. And they did. And I got to believe that makes her even more credible. You have an 8-month pregnant woman breaking down on the stand, talking very tenderly with her soft voice about what she went through and how she may have been into these free costs at the beginning, but that does not mean she was always involved. In fact, she expressly told Diddy she didn't want to do them anymore. And she said that she was subject to threats and drugs and other ways to force her compliance. So I thought that she did very well overall.
So let's talk about the defense opening statements. What was your thought about that? What themes did you see? And do you think that they'll be able to have a viable defense?
The defense's strategy is just about consent. I mean, it's remarkable, this case, because both sides agree to most of the facts. There's not a lot of facts in dispute here. The big difference is over consent. And Diddy is saying that he has this, he may be a domestic abuser, because that video of him beating up Cassie at the Intercontinental Hotel is devastating. But he's saying, and he's acknowledging it and saying, yeah, it may be a domestic violence case, but this is not a domestic violence charge. You got to prove racketeering, which can be tough to prove. There's a criminal enterprise and you have 2 or more predicate acts. You also have to prove that there was a lack of consent, that the human trafficking counts were from force, fraud, or coercion. And he's saying that these individuals participated in these adult sex parties. And at some point, Cassie did consent to it. And that's where the defense scored some points. They had some text messages from Cassie saying she looked forward to them. She helped organize some of the freak-offs by buying candles and setting them up. So she was part of the process. But that doesn't mean she agrees to it forever. That doesn't mean that she has unlimited consent. And then later on, she did express her reservations and push back against them. But Diddy's defense is going to be that, well, she gave consent at the beginning. And when she decided to withdraw her consent, it was murky enough that a reasonable person would not have known. It wasn't clear. And thus, there's reasonable doubt here. That's his core defense. And if he can show that there was no human trafficking here, no force, fraud, or coercion, it does affect the racketeering claim, because the racketeering count is the belief, is this theory that he is at top of this criminal enterprise to feed his sexual desires, and he used all these threats and illegal ways to get people to do his bidding. Well, if there's no human trafficking, that really does undermine the entire case and makes it more likely for an acquittal or at least a hung jury.
You talked about the domestic violence, and a lot of people that hear about that, watch the video of Miss Ventura in the hotel where Diddy with a towel wrapped around him, don't understand why he's not being charged for domestic violence. Can you shed some light onto that?
Domestic violence would be charged at the state level. It would be charged by local prosecutors, and it's not as serious a crime as human trafficking. Now, domestic violence, that kind of force, that kind of abuse with the video is bad. I mean, I'm not being a Pollyanna here. That is serious, but it's not being charged here. The feds came in and they're charging much more serious crimes of racketeering and human trafficking and violations of the Mann Act, which says you can't transport individuals across state lines for purposes of prostitution. This could put Diddy in prison for the rest of his life. If this were a state case where the state prosecutors are charging domestic violence, it would be unlikely he would spend more than a couple years in prison at the most. I think that there was a decision here for the feds to come in and go for the big charges, the serious ones that could put him in prison for the rest of his life.
Let's talk about the witnesses. So Miss Ventura is the star witness, but she wasn't the first witness. Was there some thought to that? Because usually you start with your strongest witness. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the reason why they put her on early is she does connect all the dots. She's important to set the stage for everything that happened. But also, she's 8 months pregnant. And if they waited, they could lose her as a witness entirely because she's about to have a baby. So it was more than just strategy why they put her on the stand first. It was just practicality. They did not want to lose their most important witness because of the birth of her child.
What do you think she helped prove when she took the witness stand?
I think that she moved the ball forward on human trafficking. In fact, I think that she was able to be so convincing, so credible, that the prosecution could get a conviction on human trafficking based on her testimony alone. And there's going to be more corroboration that's coming out and more witnesses are coming forward, but she is the key to that case. Now, she didn't do as much on the racketeering count. The racketeering count needs more. You need to show there was a team around Diddy to do his bidding, to extort people, to threaten people, to commit arson, this type of stuff. Diddy doesn't have to be involved in it directly. It can be done for him, to benefit him. See, racketeering was originally made for the mafia, to get at the mob boss, where the mob boss has all of his lieutenants doing his work. Well, the racketeering statute isn't just for mob bosses anymore. It's not just for the mafia anymore. We saw this with R. Kelly. He was convicted of racketeering with somewhat similar facts, and he's sitting in a prison cell right now. So that's why the prosecutors decided to do this, because this statute is broad enough to incorporate more than the mafia. It can incorporate a music executive, a hip hop star who has an enterprise geared towards pleasuring his sexual desires. I mean, that counts. But I don't think Cassie was able to convince the jury beyond a reasonable doubt that he's guilty of racketeering. You need more. You need to show there are others involved, and they did more than the human trafficking. You have to show 2 predicate acts. So I think that's where the other witnesses come into play.
And who do you think would help establish that for the prosecution in regard to the racketeering charges?
The witnesses that the prosecution have put on subsequent to Cassie, the sex workers, I think have helped, because there are people who have worked with Diddy who have also been sex workers who can testify and have testified that they were subject to threats and intimidation. And we'll see that there was some arson involved, allegedly, to ensure compliance. That's what you need. You need to show 2 predicate acts, meaning 2 crimes that come under the racketeering statute. And arson is one of them. Human trafficking would be another. Also, you would have the intimidation of witnesses as another, where you threaten people in certain ways if they don't lie for you. So there are a number of potential predicate crimes that could establish racketeering, but you also have to show that there's an ongoing criminal enterprise. It's not just an ad hoc group of hip hop stars who are just pleasuring their sexual desires. It's more that there's a mission, a company, a group of people with the same focus to make sure the boss gets what he wants.
So who do you think could help establish that for the prosecution, and how does the prosecution go about doing that?
The sex workers and the employees who are being put on the stand, they're testifying to what they went through, all the lie detector tests that they were told, and the threats that they were given, and they had to do certain things, the drugs perhaps that they were given to ensure compliance. I mean, there are certain ways they can show that they were the victim of extortion. If you don't comply, we're going to release this video of you at the freak offs, and it's going to destroy your career. Well, there you go. If you don't lie for the boss, we're going to destroy your career. That's extortion, and that's a predicate crime. And then there are others, the human trafficking, like I said, arson is going to come out. There are a bunch of crimes that will help establish it. But Cassie's testimony alone, I don't think did it. Now, the lie detectors are interesting because they had some intimidating person come in and implement lie detectors. That alone is not a crime. But if you do so in a way to intimidate people into not telling the truth, then that would be a problem for Diddy. But it does go to the larger narrative that this is an enterprise that's organized, that they even have lie detector professionals to intimidate people into compliance. This isn't just an ad hoc group of people. Why do you have people on staff to give you lie detectors? Because your company is engaged in racketeering. This is an illegal enterprise doing illegal things, hurting lots of people, and that's why they're being charged with crimes.
Going back to Ms. Ventura's testimony, how do you think the defense did on the cross-examination of her?
I thought the defense did pretty well. They scored some points. It was tough because you have to treat her with kid gloves. She's 8 months pregnant. She was victim of physical abuse and allegedly sexual abuse, and they used a woman lawyer, and that was smart, and they were pretty gentle on her, which was smart, because you don't want to look like you are victimizing the victim yet again. And it's not just the defendant being put on trial. Also, the lawyers are on trial in some way. The jurors want to conclude whether they like or dislike the lawyers. And if they dislike the lawyers, they're going to dislike the lawyers' clients. So I thought it was smart that Diddy's lawyers handled Cassie Ventura in a delicate way. And they showed some text messages from her where she wanted to do the freak offs. And that would get to the consent. That's their defense. That's the ball game for them. But I thought that she made it clear that, yes, she did feel like that. She was intimidated by him. She wanted to please him. She was much younger than he and much more inexperienced, and she wanted to make him happy. And she feared if she didn't, that he would abuse her and or destroy her career. And then there were the drugs and other ways to ensure compliance. So I thought her testimony overall showed that she may have been into it at the beginning, but that ended, and then it was just an issue of force, fraud, and coercion.
But how does the juror parse out at one point it was consensual and then at another point it wasn't?
That's the big challenge for jurors, because we saw the Harvey Weinstein case that it can be done. You've got to convince the jury that, yes, victims of sexual violence can be friends with their perpetrator. They can maintain a relationship. They may have delayed reporting. That's just reality. Now, I think if this case were tried 20 years ago, that'd be a lot harder to explain to a jury. But now jurors are told, they have experts, and society has changed, that we know that just because someone doesn't report it right away, someone continues to have a relationship with a perpetrator, doesn't mean that they consented the whole way through. It doesn't mean it didn't happen. And jurors are going to be asked to parse that. And if they can't parse it, then the defense wins.
As a former prosecutor, is there anything that you think the prosecution is not doing that they should be doing? And are there things that they're doing really, really well?
Oh, I think they're doing really well. I know there was some criticism of putting Cassie's mother on the stand, to the extent that the defense didn't even cross-examine her, thinking she wasn't an important witness. But I think it tells the full picture of how Cassie was pushed into this against her will and was involved in a very troubling relationship where he was the domineering one. He was older and had all the cards, and used his power and influence to force her to comply with all of his demands. And then there were the drugs. And I think as a mother, I think that she came across well to the jury as someone who really cared about Diddy. She tried, about Cassie. She tried to hit Diddy. She tried to punch Diddy and wasn't able to do so. That's how passionate she was on. And I think that mothers on the jury can understand that. So I think the prosecution is doing really well. I think the case has been lawyered well on both sides. Both sides are dealing with the facts they're given. There's not a lot of difference between the sides on the facts. And both of them are going to make their case to the jury, whether there was consent or whether there was force, fraud, or coercion. And I think so far, the prosecution is ahead.
So talking about the jury, as a former prosecutor, would you want on this type of case the number of men on this jury as compared to women?
Yeah, that's fine. It just depends on how they answer their questionnaire. You can have men who would be more sympathetic to a woman like Cassie, can look and see this attractive, sweet, very credible witness who's on the stand, and the man may think, I like her, I trust her, I believe in her. Sometimes you'd have women who are tougher on other women. I don't have to tell you that, Kelly. I mean, you know, in life sometimes. I mean, I've been through trials, and it's not automatic where women are going to just side below women. I mean, if women always supported other women, Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris would be president.
It's a very, very good point. So from the defense standpoint, who do you think that they will bring to testify in their case, and what kind of evidence do they want, and who are they going to get to help support that?
We'll have to bring up people who can say that this is a consensual activity, that they were witnesses and they spoke to Cassie and others who are now claiming to have been violated, to say, no, they're all into it. We all knew what we were getting into. But the key here is to poke holes in the prosecution's case rather than put on evidence for the defense. I don't expect the defense to put on a lengthy case. I think they're going to just try to show there's some reasonable doubt here. And it's the prosecution's burden entirely to show everything beyond a reasonable doubt, whether it's the charge of the racketeering charge, or the charge on human trafficking, or the violations of the Mann Act, which is less serious but still could get him prison time. That's the prohibition against transporting individuals across state line for purposes of prostitution. All that stuff has to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt by prosecution. There's no burden that the defense has. So that's why they just have to poke some holes in the case, and all it takes is one juror to have some reasonable doubt, and that's a hung jury. So that's why it's not so easy to be a prosecutor, because you've got all the burdens, and all it takes is one. And if the prosecution loses the case, if there's an acquittal, you can't appeal. But if the defense loses, they can appeal, and they are setting themselves up for potential appeal because they are making objections as to the admissibility of some evidence. The prosecution, for example, has been able to put in evidence. They showed the lubricant and the baby oil and all that stuff that may or may not be completely admissible. It's going to inflame the jury. Is it more prejudicial than it is probative, especially when both sides admitted that these freak-offs happened? Do you need to show these items? Well, they're admitted. And so the defense may try to appeal that if Diddy is convicted.
Do you think that they'll also appeal based on the video of him in the hotel room with the towel, that's also being admitted in evidence, that the same effect in regard to that it shouldn't be admitted, that it's probative value in regards to the evidence that's presented?
Absolutely. That is the most devastating piece of evidence so far. I mean, people lie, but video does not. And that video tells a million words. That video shows the level of violence, because Diddy denied everything until that video came out. Then he settled Cassie's lawsuit within a day, and then he admitted to that conduct. The only thing he's ever admitted to really is what's shown on the video. Other than that, he's denying everything. Well, I mean, that video tells you all you need to know about what kind of person Diddy is. No reputable individual, no man should ever do anything like that. So even if Diddy is acquitted in this case, he'll never be exonerated in the court of public opinion after that video came out. That was devastating. Now, whether it should be admitted, I think it should. It will be appealed. He'll appeal it because it is prejudicial, but the probative value is more important, meaning that it's relevant evidence. It shows the level of force. Force is an element to this crime. You need to show force, fraud, or coercion to establish human trafficking. That shows force. Now, Diddy's response is that that force was not involving the freak-offs. It was involving just basic jealousy over a relationship, and that's why you see it's over. He's grabbing a phone, and it's nothing to do with a freak-off. Okay, well, that's still relevant, whether your side says it has nothing to do with the freak-off and the prosecution says it's totally about the freak-off. Cassie testified to that. It's relevant evidence, and if it gets appealed to an appellate court, I think the appellate court will reject Diddy's appeal on that grounds.
Talking about the Mann Act, you talked about that. Has the prosecution proved the elements of that charge? And if so, what witness helped substantiate that?
All those sex workers who got paid and they were transported over state lines, that's a violation of the Mann Act. There were some problems with some cross-examination. One of the witnesses said, well, he didn't necessarily get paid and he would have done it for free, and he didn't. And there was an issue over payment. So, but I think overall, the fact that these were sex workers who were being brought in, people were being paid. Yeah, I think that they've got him on the Mann Act, and I think they've got him on human trafficking. Not so sure on the racketeering charge yet. As of right now, I would say they have enough to convict on human trafficking and Mann Act, but not enough on racketeering. But the trial is still in its beginning stages.
But I guess the counter argument to the Mann Act, and as a former prosecutor, you can let me know if I'm incorrect, wasn't it Ms. Ventura that paid these workers and not Diddy? Does that play a role in the fact that she paid him for the workers and not him? How does that play out in the court?
Where did the money come from? If it came from her pocket and she was not reimbursed, then yes, that would exonerate Diddy on the Mann Act charges. But that's not apparently what happened. He seemed to pay for everything, although he did require Ventura to give him $20,000 because he thought she was cheating. And she had to take out a home loan to do it. It was so outrageous. And then Diddy forgave it, but it just showed the level of intimidation that he would force a woman who had few assets to pay him, a guy who's worth apparently $250 million, $20,000, and take out a home equity loan to do so. So no, I don't believe that that came out of Cassie's pocket to pay for the prostitutes. I know we call them sex workers today, but the Mann Act used the word prostitutes, and I don't believe that it came from Cassie alone. I think even if she put the money out, if she was reimbursed by Diddy, that's good enough.
Do you think Diddy will testify?
I don't. I think his prior bad acts will come out, and I think the prosecution would just eviscerate him on cross-examination. So I don't think he will testify. I think it'll be a Hail Mary at the end if they think they're going down either way. But I think they've scored enough points that they're going to hope that the jury goes their way, and they're going to let Diddy sit there in his oatmeal jacket and his gray hair and his glasses and look like a grandfather in front of the jury. But that's not who he is in real life.
Why do you think Ms. Ventura never went to the police and reported any of these incidents?
It's just a reality of domestic violence. As a prosecutor, there's no other crime that our office prosecuted that had less victim compliance than domestic violence. Less than half of our victims cooperated with us. Even if at the beginning they called 911 and the police came, after that, most victims of domestic violence do not cooperate with prosecutors, at least not in my office. And I suspect that's a reason why, that she let it go on until she had enough. And that video changed the game. After she filed her civil lawsuit against Diddy, Diddy settled it within 24 hours. And that's what caught the attention of federal prosecutors. That's what led to these charges. Federal prosecutors are not going to charge people for domestic violence. That is a state crime. But federal prosecutors will go for human trafficking, will go for Mann Act violations, and will definitely go for RICO, racketeering charges. So that's why they came in. The state could have prosecuted him for domestic violence if it fell within the statute of limitations, but it would have been small potatoes compared to what's going on now.
So that was my next question. Why, once the video came out of Diddy in the hotel with the towel on, why didn't the prosecutors in that state charge him with domestic violence?
Depends on when it occurred. It may have been before the statute of limitations, or it may have been outside the statute of limitations. Also, the feds may have communicated with state prosecutors and say, we're looking at this. And when the feds come in, the state prosecutors generally stand down because the feds have greater resources. They have stiffer penalties for their charges. They can, and they have less discovery, meaning that there's more of an advantage for the prosecutors because they have better discovery rules for the government. Whereas at the state level, like in Florida, we have to give up everything we have to the other side. So if the feds want to come in and they want to assert jurisdiction and they want to assert, especially under the supremacy clause, that they go first, yeah, go ahead. We stand down and let them move forward. It almost always happens that way.
When you say there's a way for them to have better evidence or the rules, what do you mean by that?
Well, the federal prosecutors have a very advantageous system where they don't have to give up all their evidence early on like the state prosecutors do. See, in Florida, for example, we have very broad sunshine laws. There are depositions of victims. We have to turn over everything. It's called discovery, and it really helps a defendant to be able to get access to everything. The feds can play hide the ball until trial in many ways, and it's much harder to defend against federal charges than it is against state charges. There's a reason why federal prosecutors win like 97, 98% of the time. To beat the feds in court, you need to be someone like Mark Cuban. He did it. And there are very few others who have lived to tell the tale. Well, did he survive too? I don't know. I think that the feds have got him on this. I would be surprised if he was exonerated on all charges. Could I see him get acquitted on racketeering and convicted on the other charges? Absolutely. But I don't see him walking free from this.
When you talk about hide the ball, can you kind of explain that in regards to the Diddy trial, of what that's like for his defense team and how that works in the Diddy trial? It's fascinating.
Yeah, well, there's limited discovery, so you don't have to turn over all the stuff you have for the defense to be able to review. You don't have to provide your witnesses for deposition for the other side. And so that's the kind of thing that goes on at the state level, but not the federal level. So as far as specifically on this case, I don't know. I mean, I would love to watch this case, but the feds, another advantage for the feds, everything is so secretive that you can't even have cameras in the courtroom. And that's a way I think benefits a prosecution, because I think the defense, especially in a Diddy case, would love to have the cameras there in the court of public opinion to, you would see more of these free Diddy t-shirts, I think, out there. if it was televised. Plus, the defense generally gets to speak to the press more than the prosecution. Prosecution can't say pretty much anything to the press, but the defense has more leeway. So if there were cameras in the courtroom, I think it would benefit the defense, but there are not at the federal level. So there are lots of advantages the feds have, not to mention draconian penalties, like penalties that'll keep you in prison for the rest of your life. And I've always said, if you're going to be prosecuted, you better hope it's from a state prosecutor and not a federal prosecutor, because the feds generally get their man.
There was some discussion about alleged witness tamperings. Can you discuss that? And if that happens, will there be a superseding indictment? How does that work?
There's already been, I think, 3 superseding indictments. So that's it. This is the case. And there has been evidence of witness tampering, and that could be part of a RICO charge, because RICO's already been charged racketeering, and it is a predicate offense if you're dealing with obstruction and witness tampering. So that could be used there. So they're not going to do this again. They only get one bite at the apple. Another advantage to defendants is that you can't try someone twice for the same incident. That's called double jeopardy. It's in the 5th Amendment of the Constitution, protects the defendants against that. So this is it. This is the ball game for the prosecutors. The only way they can try this again is if there is a hung jury. Then they could do it again. But other than that, this is it.
Can you explain to our viewers what a hung jury is and what that entails?
Hung jury is when the jury can't make up their mind. You have to be unanimous. All 12 jurors have to unanimously find the defendant guilty or not guilty. And if they can't, then it's a hung jury. There are other possibilities, like the court could dismiss the case on its own, but that's not going to happen here. The judge has power. If the judge finds that the evidence, if the prosecution doesn't have a good enough case, they could dismiss it. That's not going to happen. So this case is going to head towards a verdict, and the verdict will either be guilty, not guilty, maybe guilty and not guilty on different charges, possibly, or a hung jury. And then it depends what the count is. If it's 11-1 for not guilty, then it's less likely that the prosecution will try it again. But if it's close, or if it's 11-1, 10-2 for the prosecution, then they're definitely going to try it again.
How do you think the judge is handling the case in regards to omitting evidence, not omitting evidence, dealing with each side's objections in this case?
Judge Subramanian is doing a really good job. No complaints, handling himself very well. He's a relatively young judge, and he's proving that he is up to this task.
Thank you, Dave, for your time. It was wonderful to have you on the show.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you for joining us. See you next time.